Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Chad Lockhart. I'm 38 years old, a federal judge in Colorado. If you see me in my black robe, sitting behind the bench, you'd probably think I come from legacy and prestige. That I was molded for power. But the truth? The truth is, I was forged by rejection. And not just from society, but from my own blood. I was born into a dynasty. The Lockharts. Real estate royalty in the Rockies. My father, Gerald Lockhart, was a business icon. Ruthless. Calculated. A man who made empires with a handshake and buried rivals with a single clause. My mother, Veronica, was the definition of high society, pearls, cocktails, and cutting remarks. To the world, we were the Kennedys of Denver. To me, we were a cold machine, programmed to crush. Growing up, I wasn't raised. I was evaluated. Everything I did, grades, posture, how I held a wine glass at age 10, was critiqued like I was on trial. My parents didn't beat me. They didn't need to. Their silence was sharper. Their praise reserved for one person only, my younger brother, Ethan. Ethan Lockhart. 3 years younger, golden smile, Wall Street mind. My father saw himself in Ethan. He brought him to board meetings before he could drive. At 13, Ethan was sitting in the corner of a skyscraper, learning how to destroy people with contracts. And me? I liked books. Philosophy. Government. Justice. Justice. That word always made my father scoff. You'll never survive the world with your head in the clouds, Chad, he once said, slamming the Wall Street Journal onto my dinner plate. This family builds. We don't dream. I tried to please him. God knows I did. I joined debate team, won national competitions, even interned at a law firm during high school. But the one time I came home with a first-place trophy, he barely looked up from his scotch. Meanwhile, Ethan got a new car for scoring an average B in econ. By the time I told them I wanted to go into law, specifically public service, not corporate law, my father looked at me like I'd spit on the family crest. You want to help poor people, he said, chuckling. What are you, a saint now? My mother just sighed and passed the salt. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was subtle. Like watching a door slowly close, and realizing you're on the wrong side of it. I still remember the final straw. I was 22. Just accepted into law school. I came home for dinner, hopeful that maybe, just maybe, they'd say they were proud. Instead, my father tossed a folder on the table. Review this, he said. Ethan's drafting a deal with some developers in Breckenridge. You're legal, I might actually be useful. I opened the folder and felt my stomach churn. It was a contract meant to bulldoze low-income housing in favor of luxury condos. Dozens of families would be displaced. Legally. Quietly. I'm not doing this, I said, pushing the folder back. It's wrong. His eyes turned cold. You don't say no to this family, Chad. Well, maybe I'm not part of this family, I whispered. And just like that, he stood, walked around the table, and opened the front door. Then leave. No yelling. No emotion. Just, dismissal. My mother didn't even stand. She reached for her wine and muttered, You chose this. I packed that night. No tearful goodbyes. No apology from either side. Just silence. And silence became my life. I moved into a shoebox apartment, paid for law school with scholarships and a job at a coffee shop, and never looked back. But the scar? The scar stayed. Because when your own parents brand you a failure, it doesn't matter how loud the world cheers, you always feel like you're whispering. They say when you hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. But what they don't tell you is how long you might stay there, staring at the dirt, wondering if anyone even knows you fell. For me, rock bottom was a second-hand futon in a freezing apartment in Aurora, Colorado. The kind of place where the heat groaned at night, the fridge whined like a sick animal, and the ceiling leaked if the snow piled high enough. But I didn't complain. I couldn't afford to. Pride doesn't keep you warm when you've been cut off from everything. Law school was brutal. I'd go to class in the mornings, study all afternoon, then work nights at a downtown cafe where no one tipped and everyone asked if I was tired. I was more than tired, I was empty. My classmates came from old money, country clubs, and alumni legacies. They'd talk about spring break in the Alps or summer internships at their uncle's firm in New York. I couldn't even afford a decent winter coat. Every time someone said, "So what did your parents do?" I'd lie. "They moved to Europe," I'd mutter, or, "They passed a few years ago," just to avoid the awkward silence that always came when I said the truth. They disowned me. But even in the shadows of that despair, something kept me moving. A stubborn voice in my head that whispered, "You're not done yet, Chad." I remember one night during my second year. I'd just gotten home after a double shift. My hands were blistered from scrubbing espresso machines, my feet numb from walking all day in discount dress shoes. I opened the fridge, half an apple, 2 eggs, and a nearly empty bottle of mustard. That was dinner. I sat down, the lights flickering above me, and opened my laptop to study tort law. But the words blurred. My eyes stung. My hands shook. I slammed the book shut and buried my face in my palms. For the first time in years, I sobbed. Not the quiet kind. The ugly, body-shaking kind of crying. Not because I was hungry. Not even because I was exhausted. But because I was alone. Utterly, painfully, damnably alone. There were no holiday calls. No birthday cards. Not a single, "We miss you," from my parents. Not even from Ethan. He was too busy being the golden child, the heir to the Lockhart throne. And the worst part? I didn't hate them. I hated me, for still wanting them to care. I kept a single photo of us, taken when I was maybe 9. We were at a beach in California. My dad had his arm around Ethan. My mom had her designer sunglasses on. And I was in the corner of the frame, half cut off, smiling like I mattered. I used to stare at that photo when I felt weak. And every time, I'd ask myself the same question, why wasn't I enough? That despair nearly swallowed me whole. I almost dropped out twice. I couldn't afford all my textbooks, so I borrowed old editions from the library. I walked 2 miles to school in the snow to save on bus fare. Some nights I'd sleep on the floor at the law building because it was warmer than my apartment. But I endured. I endured because somewhere deep down, a flicker remained. A belief, tiny, stubborn, and buried, that justice wasn't just an idea. It was real. It was worth fighting for. And I wasn't going to let the people who gave up on me be the reason I gave up on myself. By the time I graduated, I wasn't celebrating. I was crawling. I had no job offers. No safety net. Just a law degree and a mountain of debt. But then came the moment that would change everything. A community law center in Denver, tiny, underfunded, forgotten by the big leagues, posted an ad. They needed someone to help low-income tenants fight unfair evictions. I applied. No one else wanted the job. It paid pennies. No prestige. No headlines. But for me? It was oxygen. On my first day, I sat across from a single mother of 2 who had just been thrown out of her apartment. Her landlord raised the rent by 40% overnight, knowing she couldn't afford it. When she cried in front of me, saying, "They treat us like roaches," something inside me clicked. That was the first time in my life I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. And I made a promise right then and there, I will never become the kind of man who steps on the weak just to rise higher. I will rise so I can lift others. But it would still be years before my past caught up with me. Before my name would appear in newspapers, not as a failure, but as a judge. And when my father's lawyer walked into my courtroom one day and realized who I was, well, that was just the beginning of their downfall. By the time I turned 34, people finally stopped asking me what my parents did. Because by then, I had my own name. I'd built a reputation as a sharp, relentless advocate for the people no one cared about: tenants, immigrants, minimum wage workers, whistleblowers. The Denver legal circuit started whispering my name in courtrooms. Chad Lockhart. The people's litigator. I didn't care about the praise. I cared about the faces of the clients who looked at me like I was their last hope. I wore my worn-out suit like armor. My court briefs were stitched with fire. And slowly, case by case, I was carving out my place, not in luxury towers like the ones my father built, but in community halls, courtrooms, and, eventually, headlines. And then it happened. I got the call. It was a Wednesday morning. Cloudy. I was reviewing paperwork when my assistant rushed in. "Chad," she said, out of breath, "the governor's office. They want to meet." I blinked. Governor's office? For what? "They want to nominate you, for a judicial seat. State court." I laughed. Literally laughed out loud. I thought it was a prank. But it wasn't. They'd been following my work. They admired my integrity, my tenacity, my record of standing firm against corporate abuse. Within 6 months, I was sworn in as a state judge. And I'll tell you this, it wasn't pride I felt when I put on that robe for the first time. It was vindication. Quiet. Personal. A reminder that my scars hadn't made me weak, they'd forged me into someone no one could ignore anymore. Still, I kept to myself. No interviews. No self-congratulations. Just work. Until the day I walked into courtroom 3B and saw a case that made my blood run cold. It was a civil case. A multi-million-dollar fraud suit. The plaintiff? A group of construction workers. The defendant? Lockhart Development Group. My father's company. At first, I thought it was a cruel coincidence. But then I read the details, and my heart sank. Dozens of workers had been underpaid for months. Hours were shaved from timecards. Overtime was denied. Injured workers were let go without compensation. And the kicker? The internal documents suggested someone at the top knew about it. As I scanned the docket, something even more surreal happened. The attorney representing the defense was none other than Victor Klein, my father's longtime personal lawyer. I knew him from when I was a kid. I used to call him Uncle Vic. I wondered if he'd recognize me. He didn't, not right away. I sat on the bench, composed, gavel in hand. The courtroom was packed. Court is now in session. Judge Chad Lockhart presiding. Victor looked up. And froze. His face went pale. His briefcase slipped slightly from his hand. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't say a word. I just looked him dead in the eyes. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then, with a small cough, he composed himself. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to request a continuance while we reassess certain documents." I nodded. Motion granted. But only once. Court adjourned. I stood, gathering my papers. That's when Victor approached me in the hallway. "Chad," he said, his voice trembling. "My God. You're the judge." "I am," I said, calm but firm. "Does your father?" He trailed off. "No," I replied. "And I suggest you don't tell him. Let's see if the truth surprises him as much as it surprised you." He looked shaken. Not just because I had become something none of them ever imagined, but because I now held the power to expose everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had dismissed me, erased me, buried me behind Ethan's shadow, was now standing trial under my gavel. And what came next would destroy their perfect world. Because as I dug deeper into the case, I uncovered something that went far beyond wage theft. Hidden in one of the internal audits filed with the court was a name. A signature. A coded transfer to a shadow account in the Cayman Islands. The name on the authorization line. Ethan Lockhart. My brother. My golden, untouchable brother, the heir to everything. And he was at the center of the fraud. That moment was like the world tilting. I sat alone in my chambers, hands trembling, staring at the document. I had a choice to make. A crossroads I had always feared. Do I recuse myself? Or do I stay on the case, and risk exposing my own family? I looked out the window. The Denver skyline sparkled in the late afternoon haze. And I thought back to that boy on the futon, eating half an apple, wondering if he mattered. I stood up, turned back to the case file, and whispered to myself. I matter now. The night I found my brother's name in those offshore documents, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chambers long after the courthouse had emptied, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly like they were trying to whisper secrets. My heart raced, but my hands were steady. Because for the first time in my life, I held something more powerful than revenge. I held the truth. I didn't want vengeance just to hurt my family. That would have been too easy. No, I wanted justice. Poetic justice. The kind that doesn't scream or throw fists, but walks into a courtroom, wearing a black robe, and calmly rearranges the world. But to do that, I had to play it smart. First, I requested an official judicial review panel. I didn't want any hint of bias. I disclosed my family connection, formally, and requested permission to stay on the case. Unusual, yes. But not impossible. Especially when your record is clean, your rulings respected, and your reputation, ironclad. The panel reviewed my request. Approved. I would remain the judge. My hands were tied legally, no backroom deals, no manipulation. But there were other ways to ensure the truth came out in full view. The workers who filed the lawsuit had retained a small-time attorney named Maria Alvarez. Young. Nervous. Green as spring grass. I called her into my chambers under pretense of clarifying court scheduling. When she sat down, clutching her notepad like a shield, I spoke plainly. Ms. Alvarez, I said, this is bigger than you think. Your clients deserve a real chance. She blinked, confused. Sir. I leaned in, voice low. Dig deeper. Follow the money. Start with the offshore accounts. There's a paper trail. And you'll find my brother's name on it. Her eyes widened. You're giving me a lead. I'm pointing you toward justice, I said. Whether you chase it, that's up to you. She nodded, stunned but determined. I will. That was step one. Step two came days later, when Victor, my father's lawyer, sent a letter requesting private arbitration. He wanted the case buried, quietly settled behind closed doors. I denied it. Public trial. Full transparency. Every document, every name, every decision, exposed under oath. By now, the whispers had begun. The legal circuit started buzzing. Isn't that Gerald Lockhart's son? He's judging his own family's case. What if he flips the whole thing? I kept silent. Kept working. But inside me, something had awakened. Not rage. Not bitterness. Just resolve. For years, I had tried to prove my worth, to them. To people who couldn't see past their own egos and greed. But now, I didn't need their recognition. I had the law. I had the facts. And finally, I had leverage. The next hearing came faster than expected. Victor walked in, face taut, eyes flicking toward me as if begging for a crack of mercy. There was none. I watched as Maria Alvarez stood up in court, stronger than before, her voice louder, more confident. Your Honor, we have new evidence. Documents linking Lockhart Development Group's offshore accounts to executive fraud, including signed authorizations by Ethan Lockhart. The courtroom erupted. I banged the gavel once, but inside, I let the chaos breathe. Let the cameras catch it. Let the news cycle turn. Let the truth rise. The judge they once dismissed now held the reins. But my favorite part? It came a week later, during a procedural conference, when my father showed up. He walked into my courtroom like a ghost, older, grayer, the same expensive watch on his wrist but none of the fire in his eyes. He hadn't seen me since he threw me out of the house 16 years ago. Our eyes met. He didn't speak. Neither did I. I didn't need to. His eyes scanned the courtroom, then landed on the plaque, Judge Chad Lockhart. And for the first time in his life, I swear, I saw fear. Because he knew. This wasn't the son he raised. This was the man he couldn't control. This was the man who now held the gavel, and the power to bring down everything he'd spent a lifetime building. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply said, proceed. The trial wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about reckoning. And every day that passed, I prepared, not to win, but to make sure no one could rewrite the narrative. This wasn't a private failure anymore. It was going to be public. Official. And irreversible. You want to bury me, Father? Congratulations. You just dug your own grave. The trial was officially scheduled for 3 weeks later. But in those 3 weeks, my family's carefully manufactured world began to crack, loudly. The media got wind of it. Not just that Lockhart Development Group was under fire for fraud and labor abuse. But that the presiding judge was none other than Chad Lockhart, the estranged son of the empire. Headlines spread like wildfire. Real estate royalty faces courtroom reckoning, son holds the gavel. Judge Lockhart breaks silence, presides over trial that could ruin his family. I didn't do interviews. I didn't speak to press. I let the courtroom be my answer. But the calls started. From former classmates. From law school professors. Even from some of the board members on the governor's judicial committee. And then, from Ethan. I hadn't heard his voice in over a decade. But the second I answered the unknown number, I knew it was him. Chad, he said, his voice shaky, can we talk? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure who he was anymore. Talk, I said, coldly. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he whispered. I wanted to make Dad proud. You know how he is. You know what it's like. I didn't answer. Please, he said. Maybe we can make this go away. Quietly. Settle. There it was. Still playing the family game. Still thinking the rules could bend around us. Ethan, I said slowly, you're on trial. This isn't a boardroom. And I'm not your brother right now. I'm the law. He paused. Then snapped. You think you're better than us now? No, I said. I just think I'm finally free of you. Click. That was the last time he called me before the trial began. But I knew that call, recorded by court procedure, would serve a purpose. Ethan had just admitted motive. Pressure. Fear. A perfect storm for a crumbling defense. Then came the first day of trial. The courtroom was packed. Press, protesters, former employees, everyone wanted to see the royal family on its knees. My mother showed up. She sat in the second row behind Ethan, her hands clenched around a silk scarf. Her eyes met mine, just once. They didn't plead. They mourned. She already knew how this would end. Victor Klein was stiff, formal. His legal team fumbled through objections, redactions, technicalities, but it didn't matter. Because Maria Alvarez had come prepared. She stood in front of that court like a storm wrapped in a suit. "Your Honor," she said, "the plaintiff's evidence proves a deliberate scheme to embezzle funds, falsify wage records, and intimidate whistleblowers. This was not a mistake. This was a business model." Then she introduced the surprise witness, Ana Delgado. I nearly lost my composure when I saw her. Ana had worked for my father for 25 years. A quiet, precise woman who used to offer me cookies in the office break room when I was 10. And now, she was about to end the Lockharts. She took the stand, voice calm, eyes unwavering. "I was asked to shred financial records," she said. "I refused. I made copies." "Who gave the instruction?" Maria asked. Ana didn't blink. "Ethan Lockhart. Directly. And I was warned, by Gerald Lockhart, that if I said anything, I'd never work in this town again." The courtroom gasped. My father's face was stone. But his eyes were empty. Like he knew he was finally cornered. I allowed the testimony. I allowed the documents. I allowed every damning word to be spoken without interference. Not because I wanted revenge, but because justice demanded it. And for the first time in my life, justice was finally mine to give. The trial moved like a slow avalanche. Every day, new pieces of my family's corruption tumbled out. Fake LLCs, bribes. Tax evasion. Labor exploitation. And then, when Maria presented a chain of internal emails between Ethan and contractors, it was over. He had written it himself. "Don't worry about OSHA regs. We'll handle it if someone snitches. Dad's cool with it." I looked across the courtroom at Ethan. He couldn't even lift his eyes. He knew. He was finished. But the twist? That came when Victor Klein, the man who once protected my father like a guard dog, took the stand under subpoena. He looked fragile. Defeated. But when Maria pressed him with the threat of perjury, he broke. "I was ordered to falsify the corporate ledgers," he said quietly. "Ordered by Gerald Lockhart." Silence. Then gasps. Even I couldn't have predicted that. I leaned back in my chair, staring straight at my father. He didn't flinch. But his legacy? It had just collapsed. By the end of the second week, it wasn't just a trial, it was a public unraveling. The Lockhart name, once printed on skyscrapers and golf tournament banners, now bled across newspaper headlines in shame. And still, I thought I had seen everything. Until the moment came that flipped everything I believed on its head. It started quietly. A clerk entered my chambers during recess with a manila folder. She looked confused. "Judge Lockhart, this was dropped off anonymously," she said. "No return address. But you should see this." Inside were 3 pages. Black and white. Grainy photocopies. Emails. Not from Ethan. Not from Victor. But from Gerald Lockhart. My father. And what they showed changed everything. It was a thread of messages between my father and a private investigator, dated 5 years earlier. The subject line read, "Surveillance, Chad Lockhart, daily activity." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. The messages were detailed logs. Arrives at courthouse 7:42 a.m. Meets with tenant advocacy group at 3 p.m. Works late. Leaves office 10:31 p.m. And then one final line. "He's not who we thought. He's becoming dangerous. He's building influence." There was a response from my father. "Keep watching. I need to know if he's planning anything against the family. And make sure he doesn't find out." I froze. For years I had wondered if they even remembered I existed. All this time, I thought they had written me off. But the truth? They had been watching me. Afraid of me. Preparing. And suddenly, it hit me like cold steel. This trial was never just about Ethan. Or the money. Or even justice. It was a war my father had started long before I stepped into a courtroom. He knew what I would become. He knew I'd be the one to stand up. And he tried to stay ahead of me the only way he knew how, through control, manipulation, surveillance. But he failed. And now, as I sat there, alone in my chambers, I realized this wasn't just poetic justice anymore. It was personal. I could have kept the folder to myself. Hidden it. Let my father walk away while Ethan took the fall. But no. That wasn't who I was. Instead, I had the contents verified, submitted them as new evidence, and called for a new witness. The next day in court, I ordered the PI, the same one from those emails, to take the stand. He was hesitant. Nervous. But under oath, he cracked. "Yes," he said. "I was hired by Gerald Lockhart to follow you. For years. He thought you were building a case. He was afraid you'd bring down the company from the inside." The gallery gasped. My mother looked like she couldn't breathe. My father? He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me with the same look he gave me the night he threw me out, a mix of calculation and cold detachment. Only this time, I was the one in power. I stared back, voice level, and said, "Let the record reflect that Mr. Lockhart surveilled a sitting officer of the court." And in that moment, I wasn't his son anymore. I was his reckoning. The jury sat in stunned silence. Ethan looked at our father like he had been punched in the gut. Because in that moment, even he realized, Dad had never planned to save him. Just to survive him. When we adjourned that day, I didn't go straight home. I walked the halls of the courthouse. Past the portraits of judges before me. Past plaques with names I used to envy. And I stopped at the restroom mirror. I looked at myself. Same face. Same eyes. But different man. Not broken. Not bitter. But clear. The war my father waged in silence. He lost. Not because I destroyed him. But because I didn't become him. The final day of the trial arrived like a cold wind through a cracked window, inevitable, sharp, and brimming with everything unsaid. The courtroom was at capacity. Press cameras were trained on the door. Protesters stood outside, holding signs reading, "Justice for the workers," and "Power must answer to truth." But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. I took my seat at the bench and looked out at the people who had once called me a failure. Ethan sat stiffly next to his attorney, eyes dark and puffy, his tie crooked, his entire posture deflated. He wouldn't meet my gaze anymore. And maybe that was for the best. My mother sat behind him, silent, dressed in gray, her pearls traded for a plain silver chain. Her face wasn't powdered or picture-perfect anymore. It was real. And that, in some way, hurt more than I expected. And then, my father. Gerald Lockhart. Stone-faced. Suit perfectly pressed. Still pretending he had control. But I knew better. The evidence had been presented. The surveillance. The fraud. The offshore accounts. The betrayal. The denial. Now it was time for judgment. I rose. The courtroom went silent. The court has reviewed the evidence presented. It has considered the testimony, the documentation, the whistleblowers, and the admissions on record. I paused, letting the words settle like dust before a storm. In the case of Lockhart Development Group versus the People, this court finds the defendants, Ethan Lockhart and the Lockhart Development Board, guilty of fraud, labor violations, and financial misconduct. The court orders a restitution of $4.7 million to the victims named in the civil suit. Additionally, the matter of criminal prosecution is now referred to the Colorado Attorney General for further action. A gasp shot through the room. My mother let out a trembling breath. My father's jaw clenched. But I wasn't done. I turned to the courtroom. I've been told that family is everything. That blood should protect blood, even in the face of corruption. But this courtroom doesn't serve bloodlines. It serves truth. And sometimes, truth is the only family you'll ever need. I struck the gavel once, firm, final. This court is adjourned. The room exploded into murmurs, reporters rushing out, people crying, hugging. But I didn't move. I stood still, watching Ethan slump in his seat as the bailiffs approached. Watching my father walk out, not with the arrogance of a man who built an empire, but with the slow, hollow gait of a man who just watched it collapse. My mother didn't follow him. She came to me instead. As I removed my robe and stepped down from the bench, she stood there, hands trembling. "Chad," she whispered. I turned. She looked at me, not like I was a stranger, or a disappointment, but like I was something she didn't know how to describe anymore. "I was wrong," she said. "So wrong." "I know," I said. "I should have protected you," she whispered. Not him." I nodded, throat tight. She reached forward, hesitated, then touched my arm. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not because you won. But because you didn't become him." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. She walked away. And I stood there, breathing deeply, not in victory, but in release. 2 years later, I still live in the same quiet condo on the edge of Denver. Still drink too much coffee. Still ride my bike through the snow like I did when I had nothing. But now, I serve as a federal judge, nominated, confirmed, and seated with the full weight of the law behind me. And I never forget where I came from. Sometimes people ask me, "Do you regret it? Ruling against your own family?" And I say no. Because if I had let them walk free, if I had let the Lockhart name outweigh the law, I would have proven them right. That I was weak. That I could be controlled. Instead, I became what they never expected. Myself. And yes, Ethan still serves time. I visit sometimes. He barely speaks. But I keep showing up. Because I'm not there to punish him. I'm there to remind him that he's still more than our father's shadow. My mother and I write occasionally. It's cautious, but it's real. She sends me old photos sometimes, ones I didn't know existed. Of me as a boy. Laughing. Playing with Ethan in the yard. Those memories aren't gone. Just buried. Waiting to be reclaimed. As for my father, we haven't spoken since the verdict. But I hear he sold off pieces of the company, trying to salvage what little was left. His face doesn't appear on magazine covers anymore. His name doesn't echo through city chambers. And for the first time in my life, that doesn't bother me at all. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.